Thank you all for coming today. It's a huge honor and a personal pleasure to have you all here. Want to first thank Al and the rest of the Sandlot guys that work so hard and passionately to get this event together every year. Want to thank Mr. Wells for his commitment to keep this this event going. The Smatra family, of course, one of the main reasons why we're here today. I want to take this opportunity to make a personal and professional plea. When you go home today, there's ways that you could help us here at the Baseball Heritage Museum. Time, talent, and treasure is what I like to say. With your time, you can volunteer at one of our many events. That's a huge help. If you have a special talent, perhaps you can help us that way too. And treasure. Funds, money is always great, but treasure also lies in your closets, in your attics, in your basements, and musty boxes, stuff that you may not have thought about for years is extremely valuable to the museum. I see a Schrader jersey in the back. I got my eye on it. I want it. Yeah. Oh, there we go. I love it.
That's the way we operate.
So, I make that plea because the museum cannot continue to tell these stories that are so important to all of us. That's why we're here, right? These stories. We can't tell these stories and preserve that history without the stuff that I call stuff, you know? So when you go home today, think about what I'm asking you. Look at your closets, your basements, your attics, and it may seem like junk to you, but it's extremely invaluable to us to continue telling our story and your stories here at the Baseball Heritage Museum. I'd also like to take this opportunity to unveil a very special project that I've been working on with the Lake County Captains, their owners. They own a baseball cap company called the Official League. They approached us about doing a collaboration. So we thought the Sandlot teams would be a great way to make this inaugural collaboration come to life. So today, for the first time ever, I'd like to unveil the Wenham Truckers baseball cap. It has a logo, Sandlot class on the back, 1970 champs. If you want to support the museum, if you want to help us, these are available in the gift shop. Buy one. We'd really appreciate it. These funds go directly back to the museum. It'd be a great way to show your pride in the Wenham Truckers. We also have the Haberacker Opticians and the Witted Imps, which is a female baseball team back in the 40s. So hopefully you like them as much as we do, because we thought they came out great. And with that, I'm going to toss it over to Bob Zimmer. He's got a couple words to say. And thanks again for coming.
Well, Ricardo, that's fantastic. I want to say that Ricardo has done an absolutely fantastic job in establishing our Sandlot exhibit at the Baseball Heritage Museum, and we will continue to do so. I don't want to take up a lot of time because I know there's a full program, but I do want to recognize. Hello? I do. Well, I do want to, if everybody can hear me in the back, can you hear me? Good. I want to recognize.
It was working.
Was it?
It was. The other one. The other one.
Testing.
The other one.
Something. Oh, there we go. I do want to recognize someone who has been instrumental in really launching our Sandlot exhibit. And this is just a very small thank you, but without his support, his stuff, as Ricardo would call it, I like to talk things about artifacts, but maybe stuff is better for now. But without his support and his continued efforts, the Sandlot exhibit would not be happening the way it is today. And so I would ask if I could to get Nabi Lewandowski to come up. If you would, Nabi, just for a second. I know he's probably going to be mad at me. And it's just it's a very small token, but we made, and I know that he's somewhat retired, but we want to keep him working, so we've made some business cards for him that show him Nabi Lewandowski, Sandlot Ambassador for the Baseball Heritage Museum. There's plenty of cards in there for you to get out there, promote. Someone always promote what you're doing. So support the museum. Make sure that after this event is over, you go into the museum, because you will be blown away with the stuff that Ricardo has put together, especially our hats that we now have just launched. So thank you very much. And I'll turn it back over.
Can we help you with something else? Can you hear that? Can you hear me now? Yes, no? Yeah. Okay. The first thing I want to do is make a correction on the program that you have in front of you. The date is, we changed the date because it's Labor Day weekend on that date. We figured that would not be a good weekend to do this next year. So make note of the fact that it's going to be August 24th next year. I wanted to make sure you had that information. I also want to let you know that Ray Schmatzer and Frank Petruno, they have some clout. And when I say clout, look at the kind of day we have today. Okay? The weather's beautiful. So I know wherever they are, they made sure we had a good day today. So I just wanted to point that out to you. On another note, following what Bob said and Ricardo, you need to know that one of Frank's wishes before he passed, one of his directives was, in lieu of flowers, one of the things you can do is donate to this museum. And I did. And if any of you want to remember Frank and think, just have a good heart, think about following suit, because it's a very worthwhile cause. I've seen the tremendous growth and improvement here at the museum. And they've given us this day every year. And if you go into the museum, you will see so much space devoted to Sandlot baseball in Cleveland. And that, to me, that is very meaningful. And they have expenses to run that museum, and anything we can do as Sandlotters, because they've done so much to help us, please think about doing that. Now I'm going to go to my script, so bear with me. On behalf of our Old Timer Sandlot Committee, I welcome all of you to our annual Frank Petruno Annual Old Timer Sandlot reunion. It is extremely gratifying to see the great turnout to honor and remember two of Sandlot's greatest icons, Frank Petruno and Ray Schmatzer. These two men touched the lives of many of Cleveland's youth for decades, and they deservedly will be enshrined at the Heritage Museum today. For those of you who attended our reunion last year, you witnessed the naming of our reunion after Frank, so he could experience this honor firsthand. He sat in the front row with his family with a big smile on his face as we made this announcement. On June 9th, Frank peacefully passed away after a long health battle, and John Zygmunt will soon share his remembrance of Frank. Those in attendance also observed the honoring of Ray Schmatzer when a memorial plaque of Ray was presented to his daughter, Ann Pershey. There is a touching story behind that gesture that I must share with you. About a week before our reunion, Tim Wells called me to ask if there was any possible way we could add this presentation to our program, because Ray's son, Tim Schmatzer, was under hospice care, and he wanted Tim to experience this presentation so that he could have the plaque presented to him. Tim Wells not only secured the plaque, but also made arrangements to have the presentation videotaped so Tim Schmatzer could view it from his hospice bed. It was a no-brainer to honor Tim Wells' request. Because this happened so quickly, many of Ray Schmatzer's out-of-town family could not attend, as well as a lot of people that would like to be here, besides his family. I promised his son Dave, who lives in Texas, that we would honor Ray again this year so he could get the word out to his family, friends, and all the players that Ray impacted. And this is what you see. I told Dave, I said, if I were running for political office, you would be my campaign manager. And I meant that. I have had many phone conversations, texts, and emails with Dave this past year. Just from this experience, it was easy to see the love and respect he had for his dad, and I'm so glad to be part of planning this day. And I know Tim Wells feels the same way. I've been invited, on another note, I've been invited to many Sandlot reunions by Frank Petruno. But in 2021, he selected me to be the leader of the reunion to be held at League Park. And that has been my role ever since. You don't say no to the godfather of Sandlot baseball. After talking with Dave, we are in total agreement that we want this event to continue. But it is time to get the 70s generation of Sandlotters to develop and continue this great tradition started by Frank. The bottom line is both Phil Bova, who has served as my co-chairman, and I will be relinquishing our leadership roles in planning future Sandlot reunions. But we'll be more than willing to serve as committeemen and advisors. Either let Phil, Dave, or me know if any of you youngsters in the audience are ready to step up to the plate to lead this great tradition. And any one of us would be a phone call away to lend support. I'm so grateful for my association with 20 years of Sandlot baseball. I'm grateful for a lot of things. But 20 years of Sandlot baseball has had a tremendous impact on me and my life. And I will always be grateful. And I'd be grateful to Frank Petruno because he was the best manager I played for. He knew how to find talent. He was a master at it. And he knew how to use his talent. And I'm so glad I got a chance to play for him. When I made it to be on his team, I knew I made it. So I just wanted to say goodbye about that and make sure I mention that to you. And now John Zygmunt is going to talk about his remembrances of Frank. John? I will. Okay. Good afternoon and welcome. I have to tell you right off the bat, this is inspiring. In 1965, when I moved here from Chicago and read all about Plain Dealer, AAA. Can you hear me? I'm going to use my teacher voice rather than this. Can you hear me? You're good. Okay. And excuse me for yelling out, but I'd rather use it freely rather than with the microphone. So when I came in 65, I was inspired when I saw Plain Dealer Sports. I saw the truckers there, went to Edgewater Park. I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a minute, but I almost have that same feeling right now. This is inspiring to see our generation, is that the way to put it? And younger people. This is great. And you know, I come from a big city, and I'll make allusion to this in a bit, but Frank had asked me to compare Chicago and Cleveland regarding this. And in the museum, there's a letter that I sent to Frank, and he had it posted, and it kind of draws some comparisons. And I think he had it all over us, even though we're a bigger city. But I'll get to that in a minute. So it's encouraging today to see the turnout for two special men who left their own legacy, and all you old-timers as well. And that legacy is found not only in the museum, but in relationships right here. I want to recognize and thank first Al and the committee, Bob Zimmer and Ricardo Rodriguez, and also a guy that played under the radar, at least with these kind of sessions, but he was pretty visible at the Plain Dealer, and he kind of put us on the stage, Dan Coughlin. He did a lot of grunt work, if you will, for all of us. Thank you, Dan. It's clear that Cleveland Baseball Federation impacted all of us, and we're all grateful for that last Saturday in August, or August 24th next year, annually. So thank you, Bob and Ricardo, for that. It's on our calendar already. Thank you. So also I want to say congratulations to the Schmatzer and Petruno families. Although I'll be speaking about Frank, I knew of Ray Schmatzer as part of a unit, the truckers playing against J. Schrader Company, but I didn't know Ray personally. But both, it seems that Frank and Ray had some similar characteristics. For them, it was important to have family, faith, and community in their lives. Family, faith, and community. And I think one other thing. It said baseball is a thinking man's game. Actually, these two managers upgraded that bit of wisdom to read, baseball is a thinking ahead man's game. And if you've managed ball clubs, you know that you're in the third inning, but you're also thinking about the fifth, the sixth, and the seventh. And I know Frank worked that way, and I'm just assuming Ray Schmatzer did as well because of all of his success. So, as I said, I'm here to remember Frank, and bear with me. I'll repeat something about 3 times at least, because that's what I think of when I think of Frank Petruno. But I'll spend a little time with Frank, but Dave and Dan will do the honors for their dad. And I'd like to first share with you how I remember Frank. And really it's 3 pieces, or 3 parts. He was a community builder. He was a recreation department provider. And finally, he was a baseball ambassador. He would have had one of those cards that Nobby got just a little while ago, I'm sure. So those 3 things were intertwined in his everyday life. Let me start with why I'm here today. As I alluded earlier, I was an outsider. I came here after college graduation in '65 to go to school at John Carroll University, but also to marry my wife, Teresa. And so
I arrived at John Carroll in June, read the paper. I asked my wife, can you tell me a little bit about this AAA ball that the Plain Dealer plays up pretty well in the sports pages? You can come to Chicago now and get the Chicago Tribune, and there's nothing in high school coverage, nothing. That's where we've gone to, or slipped to, I should say, these days. So I was an outsider looking in, and I think that's why Frank asked me to do a couple things, just to show the rare, I call them opportunities that I had by coming from Chicago to Cleveland and being involved with this organization. I arrived in '65, as I said, read the Plain Dealer, visited Edgewater Park, where I thought that was the crown jewel of fields, from what my bride told me. And I found AAA ball, as the Plain Dealer called it, and I guess in the Cleveland Baseball Federation it was A ball, but PD kicked it up to AAA. I found it exciting and very competitive, and I wanted to be part of it. And even though I lost that summer after college graduation because I was starting grad school and we were getting married and I knew nobody in Cleveland except my wife, I called City Hall in the off season and said, how do I get a tryout with one of these ball clubs? Well, I think Frank's connection in City Hall was a man named Tom Maloney. And he gave me Frank's number, and I called Frank in the off season and I said, you know, I'd like to get a tryout with your ball club if you let me. And he said, well, we'll do something in the spring. You come back and you come back in the spring or give me a call in the spring and we'll work something out. So I arrived at Kinsman Park in the spring. And the first tryout was really not very pretty. I didn't have great timing to begin with as a hitter, but it was even poorer then. So that first day was kind of ugly. So I went up to him and I just said, thanks for the workout, and I figured I'd never see him again. And his line, he used this often, and it went something like this: well, you're welcome, but come back tomorrow, kid. Come back tomorrow, kid. So I did, and I stuck, and I wound up playing a couple seasons, coaching one season, and even worked with Frank at Woodhill Homes, where he had an impact as well, as I'll mention a little later. So I was with him, and I mention this because I was just one guy in a 4-year span of knowing Frank. And if you can use your math to multiply that by about 60 years of his involvement with preteens, teens, and adults, that's quite an alumni group. And again, I was just one in 4 years, and you can imagine, even if you get one guy every 4 years over that 60-year period, that's 15 guys who were greatly impacted, and there were many, many more. Several are here today. So to me, Frank was a man for all seasons. And part one of that, man for all seasons, is how he was off the field, so to speak. In this case, it was about Frank's competence and connections with various institutions and the various sites of the city where the games were played. He was a community builder, recreation provider, and baseball ambassador, as I said. On the weekdays, Frank was employed in security services for Refco and Weatherhead, two companies that I'm sure many of you are familiar with. I was only familiar with Refco when I got here. The evenings and weekends were spent by working at Woodhill Homes. It was a low-income neighborhood on the east side of Cleveland, and he ran that particular recreation center, as well as Kinsman Park and several ball fields. So again, weekdays he's working, making a living for his family. Every evening and all the weekends, Woodhill Homes, Kinsman Park, Edgewater Park, Brookside, whatever. He was a community builder who built partnerships with the city, the neighborhood, and the sports world, the athletic world. And again, I repeat these and repeat these and repeat these because that to me is Frank Petruno. So the first one, as far as being a partner or a community builder in the city, at that time in the mid-'60s, just like in Chicago, Cleveland was racially tense. It was not a good time, and I understand you had some protests even before 1965, but I saw them in '65 because I was teaching my first 2 years at East Tech, and I had a little taste of what all that was about. But anyway, it was a racially tense time in the early '60s, and Frank oversaw Woodhill Homes, as I mentioned. He got a call from Commissioner John Nagy, and John said, you know, could you do something to bring kids together, black and white? We didn't talk too much about brown at that time, it was black and white. But can you do something about bringing those kids together in a healthy way? So sure enough, Frank went to work as a Cleveland Recreation Department provider. And real quickly, and I'll unpack this a little bit more in a minute, but he had Pee Wee football in the fall, he had preteen basketball and open ice skating in the winter, and he had AAA baseball. I'll keep referring to it that way. It's AAA baseball in the spring and the summer. So the third part is Frank is a baseball ambassador, and I might add recruiter. I never gave him credit for that, but as you'll see, he was quite a recruiter. And so as a baseball ambassador, it was here that Frank's multiple contributions and partnerships were best noticed, recorded, and now honored. 3 key accomplishments that stand out are being recognized right here today. The Wenham Truckers, Sandlot Day, and the Cleveland Baseball Heritage Museum. First of all, the Truckers. As I did my homework, I found out that they had a 22-year run in Class A baseball. Some ups and downs, but overall 22 years. And they ran into a couple speed bumps, I guess, in the early or mid-60s. And so they were looking for a new manager. The wisdom of Nabi Lewandowski brought Frank together with the people from Wenham's. And so Frank took over in 66. That was our first season. And although the organization, as I said, had had a lot of success previously, they slipped in the last few years. But then Frank brought them back. And again, he brought him back with his managerial skills, his partnership skills. And his 3-year tenure was matchless. In those 3 years, we won 78 ball games and lost 11. That's an 87% winning percentage. Today in Major League Baseball, if you've got a 65% winning average, you're in the playoffs. All right, for sure, if not in the series. But anyhow, 78 and 11 over a 3-year span is pretty good, especially against the competition that we were facing in PD AAA. The second item is...
That's Frank Collins.
Frank is... Hello, Frank. Glad you're with us. Thank you. Sandlot Day was the second achievement. And I'm going to refer to the 1968 Sandlot Day version. And for those of you, well, I'm sure everyone here looking at the audience knew what Sandlot Day was, but I'll review it anyhow. As I read it and did a little history, or a little studying research, it was a financial campaign by City Hall and the Cleveland Recreation Department featuring the Indians and the Reds in the first game, and then they followed up with a second game. And all the money for that went toward equipment for all the levels. And I understand here in Cleveland you went from A to F, and even to something called Little F. I found that in one of the books. I'd never heard that one before, but all the money from that day's revenue for those ball games went in that direction. And he campaigned for our appearance in that stadium game, meaning the Truckers. So the Plain Dealer came up with an all-star team from that league to face the Truckers following that Indians-Reds game. And as Dwayne Pascura, who's here with us today, tells the story, and I probably won't do it justice, but give me a chance, and Dwayne, you might fill in if I'm missing a key piece. So it's about 1968, and I had played my first 2 years, and Frank asked me to coach, so I went to the third base coaching box when we're playing at the old municipal stadium. Dwayne Pascura was a heavy hitter, hits one out, hits it over the fence, and of course I'm at the box and I don't know what's going on in the dugout after he rounds third and goes in. And he goes in, he sits down, and after everybody giving him, we didn't give high fives in those days, but guys hugging him and slapping him and doing all of that. He comes to the bench and eventually sits down next to a visitor. And he's talking to the visitor, and the visitor doesn't identify himself. And he just says, this is a pretty good brand of ball. So you guys play this all the time, and blah, blah, blah. And he said, you did a nice job hitting the ball out today. And so he's complimenting Dwayne and the Truckers and the competition that's on the field, because you got the all-star team playing against the Truckers. Well, after a couple innings, Dwayne finds out who the guy is. He had showered after the Reds-Indians game and wanted to see what all the noise was in the stadium. Came down, sat next to Dwayne and talked. It was Pete Rose. So he just couldn't get it out of his system to see more baseball, I guess. But it was a compliment not only to Dwayne, the Truckers, the All-Stars, Sandlot Day. The third achievement is the Baseball Heritage Museum. Frank crusaded passionately into his late 80s for this kind of day, and his whole theme was honoring the past. And if you don't think he was passionate about it, ask one of his daughters or his family how much material he kept sending to them, saying, you know, take a look at this, and get it to Bob Zimmer, Ricardo Rodriguez. You got to get it into the museum because it's precious. But here he was, ill, in his late 80s, and he was just passionate about doing something like this on an annual basis. So he was a man for all seasons off the field, but he's also a man for all seasons on the field. And this is part 2. He connected his professional contacts to his interests and spread them all over the 12 months of the calendar. And as I mentioned earlier, I either played or worked with Frank for 4 years. When I worked for him down at Woodhill Homes, because I was teaching and coaching, and then on the weekends I could work at the recreation center. And here are some of the things that took place that impressed me as a young 22-year-old, 23-year-old. In the fall, it was Pee Wee football that went from no scores in the first year. They lost each game and never scored a touchdown until. And here's where his partnership ability came into play. The Pee Wees they had the ball. I wouldn't say they were marching down the field. They were on the field. And they weren't making much progress. Frank calls timeout, goes talks to the ref. Nobody knows what he's talking about. He comes back to the sideline. And all of a sudden, every time the ball goes into 3rd and long distance for the Pee Wees, a flag appears. And so they get another first down, and they move down the field. And they moved down the field, and they moved down the field. And they kept moving all the way until the time they got into the red zone, 10-yard line, not the 20, but the 10-yard line. And finally, the refs let them play, and they got into the end zone. So on the last play of their season, they scored their one and only touchdown. That was in year 1. In year 2, they came back to win the championship. And so my understanding is Frank was never hit with any recruiting violations to go from year 1 to year 2, but they were successful. So in the wintertime, we're skating at the outdoor rink in Kinsman for all ages. And then men's basketball also, we got an industrial league team to play at the Cleveland Arena. So for some of us playing at the arena, that was like being in the world, not the World Series. Well, it was like the World Series of basketball, I guess, at that time, but it was a big thrill. But it was Frank who was politicking for that. And then, of course, in the spring and the summer, it was all baseball and more baseball with the Truckers. His professional connections and relationships. Here's where Frank's most memorable partnership building came into play, with everyday people, institutions, and even City Hall. The Pee Wees were named after Vince Costello. And those of you who are a little older than I know that he was a key linebacker for the Browns in the 60s. And Frank brought him into the center, and him talked to the kids, and decided to name the team after him. And so they were the Pee Wee Costellos. The second was the partnership about the Cleveland Cavaliers were brand new in those days, and they were still at the Cleveland Arena. But he got the Industrial League team to play a couple games in the arena, as I just mentioned. So that was, again, a little bit more of his partnership ability. And then thirdly, and this is where it really shone, he was assisted with his roster by somebody in City Hall, maybe Tom. But as anybody would come into town and had finished playing pro ball and sat out a while, they'd give their name to someone at City Hall, and that person invariably called Frank and said, there's somebody new in town, you might want to see him. Well, I didn't play pro ball, but I had come to Cleveland, and I had been looking for a team, and that's how I happened to get to know Frank. So you had people working for him in City Hall to build his roster. And bear with me just a little longer. I want to start with the roster. In those days, 66, 67, those two teams, on our roster, in the lineup, there was a proven major leaguer. You oldsters know Dave Pope. He was in center field. He had played with the 54 Indians, and he came and played with us one season in center field. So that was a proven major leaguer. Then there were three future major leaguers. Steve Stone, Cy Young winner. Mike Easler was referred to as the hitman on the Pittsburgh Pirates roster in the 70s. And the third guy was somebody that Frank recruited in the postseason when you could go and take somebody out of the league and put him on your roster to go to play in Michigan. And that was Tom Murphy, who became a relief pitcher for the Kansas City Royals. So in that one roster, you had a proven major leaguer, and you had three other major leaguers to be. And then he had the whole list of pros, starting with Nabi Lewandowski. Nabi, who had played in the Pirates organization, I believe. Yes? And along with that, names that you might remember that played elsewhere, even in Japan. That was Jimmy Redmond. We also had Jim Yaknow, Phil Bova, Larry Noss, Lou Kanya. And there were a couple other guys in the room, a guy like Paul Stephan, who should have been playing pro ball, but other circumstances or age prevented him from that. So I never complimented Frank in person for having an eye for talent, but after reviewing those names for this piece, I have to believe he had a lot of recruiting skills, great recruiting skills. So with that, I would like to end with a quotation and a short prayer, if you'll indulge me. The quotation comes from a book that they used to publish, and I don't know if they still do or not, but this was like a recap of the season, all kinds of statistics, and you found out how poor you might have been, not as good as you thought you were, or something, you know. But it had the hard numbers here. Anyhow, in this book, you'll find their mission statement, simple but effective. It goes like this: give a boy a ball, a bat, and a place to play, and you never need worry he'll go astray. I know it sounds a little dated, but it still fits today. If you could provide those opportunities for kids, it's there for them, they go at it, and if they're passionate, they're going to have the kind of remembrances we all have, kind of good feelings we all have about those partnerships, those relationships. So in closing, I just want to say this. I'd like to close with a very short prayer. I'm not a cleric, but I'd like to close with a short prayer for both gentlemen. And this prayer is a blessing that comes from the Greek Catholic prayer book. And it goes like today, and by the way, it's hand in glove with Baseball Heritage Museum honoring both gentlemen today. And the prayer goes like this: may their names be eternal. Thank you. Dave, are you in the
Let me lift up here so I can fit in. All right, I timed this talk at the hotel before I came here. It was an hour and 26 minutes. I'll try to cut it down. All right, pay attention over there. But Trudeau family, you didn't know my dad, but Ray and Frank knew each other rather well, and there was so much in common between the two of them. My dad was my hero. He was my coach. And if you didn't know him, you knew somebody in the family. But Ray was heroic, just like Frank was. You know, when Frank left us, he was 90. Ray left us when he was 85. Both were iconic managers. Ray for Jay Schrader's, and of course Frank for Wyndham Truckers. When Sandlot baseball was its apex best in the 60s and the 70s. Both were iconic managers in the city. Both served the U.S. Army. Okay. Ray only cried twice in his life. One time he cried because he never talked about the war, but I asked him about it once, and he talked about D-Day, Normandy, and all that, and he broke down. And the second time he cried was we played a game at Gordon Park, and our third baseman, Bill Kramer, and he's here today. No, hey, listen, he made 6 errors. 6 errors. Let me finish. He made 6 errors in one game, and we still won the game. But it's better than that. We'd had to pick Bill up from 65th Street so we could go to Gordon because that was his mooch ride. And that day we're on 71, and he says, Ray, I forgot my glove, okay? So we had to go back and get his glove, only to watch him make 6 errors. Oh my God. True story, okay? And then, you know, tough guy Bill, who has no attention span, he's over there. You know, Ray started crying not because we were winning or losing, because he couldn't believe somebody was that bad. There's two kind of players in the game. There's winners and there's losers, right? Bill, would you stand up and tell them what a loser looks like? Hey, this is pretty overwhelming. You don't know who I am, and we were the Gold Dust Twins, and Ray caused Ray so much havoc, okay, playing the game, and then when he wasn't looking, but what a man, okay, what a man. And for us to have this today is pretty cool. In fact, I expect him to come out of, there's no cornfields in Huff, but he could come out, and maybe we could have a catch later with Ray, man, you know? My dad was a special guy. Not only was he a special father, my mother, Laverne, was just as great. And she was general manager at Cleveland Indians, Browns, and the Stadium Corporation for 35 years, and she's as heroic as my dad, you know? I got to tell you that we're all getting old. I mean, look at this crowd, okay? I got a deal next year. We're going to have it at St. Augustine's Manor at the nursing home, okay? My goodness gracious, you know? You know you're getting old when your birthday and the candles cost more than the cake, okay? You keep on laughing, we'll make a donation to the museum. Bob, thank you, Bob Zimmer. Thank you for what you did, man. I met Bob, you don't remember, but I met Bob when he was over at the arcade, and I was like, he had this little thing that he started. He had all kinds of memorabilia, but he had a picture of the beer night in 1974. Okay, it was a huge picture, and there I was at the top of that dugout spitting on Billy Martin, you know.
I had you signed.
That's right, you know. Anyway, I want to thank Tim Wells, man. He's a straw that stirs this drink too. He's unbelievable, man. You know. Okay, Al Drews. The older he gets, the better he was. We know that. He tells us that every day. Okay, but thank you, Al. Hey, my sister Ann, who's had her own health issues, and Ann is here today, along with my cousin Sandy, who's been so committed ever since my brother Tim passed away last year. We're still trying to get through that. You know how death is, man, okay? Renee, and I don't want to babble, okay? But Tim's wife, Renee, and his son, little Tim, is here. Thanks for coming, guys. I love you, man. You know that, okay? All right, I'm almost done. John Babin and Larry Bielik put so much of this together. I mean, this is a pretty overwhelming crowd. Thanks, Larry, and thank you, John Babin, for all you do for Cleveland Sandlot baseball and for what we're doing here today, okay? Boy, did you get a big clap, okay? Hey, I want to thank these guys. I had some, you know, I was a college baseball coach for 40 years, won a whole bunch of games. In fact, I've probably won 600 more than my brother did in basketball, but that's okay. But I got some former players here from Coker standing around, and that pretty overwhelms me too. But what overwhelms me even further is all these Padua guys, man. Class of 1970, what a ride that was, what a great place that was, what an influence and impact that had on who we are today. Padua, thank you, Bruins, for coming, man. It's freaking awesome. Okay? And finally, and I got one other thing to say, is I've got we grew up in the hood, okay, West 49th Street. Now you can't walk down the street with your hands in your pockets over there because the second it takes you to get them out could cost you your life, okay? But I want to thank all the Boniface guys, all the neighborhood guys I haven't seen for 40 years maybe, that came here and said hello to Ray and to the Schmatzer family from my heart, man. Thank you guys, okay? Come on. You know, my dad was tough. He was a tough guy. Not like in profanity or drunkenness, but he was a tough guy. My dad was my coach, but he was coached so many of you guys in the neighborhood, and from little F to class F to all the way to PD AAA. And as a father, and also as the manager, he expected two things from you. And that's how I think I coached, and these guys may say that. He expected obedience, okay, and he expected recovery. Those were the two big words that he would always use on his children, and he wouldn't use them so much on his teams, but he would exemplify them. And when he said obedience, what I mean by that is my dad was a stern man, okay? A devout Catholic, but he was a stern man. And he would never accept disrespect from anyone, whether it was Joe Roman in Class 7 taking ground balls and mumbling something under his breath, to Old Man River in Class A baseball. My dad expected you to listen. And if you listen, then you were obedient. That's what I was taught, okay? And if you're obedient and you listen, then you were problem solving and you were sacrificing and you became a better man, and your example was even further than that, because that's what people were looking at. You know, that was his way that he loved us. That was his way of dedication and devotion to all of us. And he did this with ever uttering. I never heard a word of profanity out of his mouth, ever, in all those 85 years. And he never got caught up in the drunkenness of the world to prove his point. He was truly, and Laverne too, was truly a saint in the city and for Cleveland Baseball Federation. And he remains my hero today, and for us to be here to recognize him means everything to the family. I mean that, okay? And also, finally, my dad was big on recovery, because this is a tough life. You get outside, people are always trying to take you down, you know? But my dad was a warlord to recovery. I can hear him now. Recover! Recover! If you made a mistake on the field, he'd yell out, recover! And if you made a mistake in life as his children, as his kids, he would yell. He wouldn't yell. He would teach us to recover, recover, recover. Ray would not accept nor allow you to drown in your self-help soup. He taught us how to be competitive, to be good sports, but mostly he taught us how to recover. He prepared us for that day when you may be 40 years old, you had 3 kids, and the wife leaves a note on the kitchen table, and she's telling you that she's leaving you for the drummer, okay? What are you going to do? You got to recover. Ray taught us how to recover. Bill would know all about that. Besides the 6 heirs, he had 6 wives, okay? You know, and after his 6th marriage, he looked in the mirror and said, you know, I'm starting to think maybe it's me, all right? All right, but Ray taught us obedience and recovery, a lesson that we would take for us the rest of our lives, a lesson he would often refer back to, and it's a lesson that all of us, if you knew Ray, make us who we are today. Little did we know that would become our measuring stick. You know, I'm talking about my dad, and I'm referring to him as Ray, because Ray insisted, okay? Ray insisted that we call him Ray, because Ray, that was a way, he didn't want us to call him Coach. He didn't want us to call him Skipper or Mr. Schmatzer, but Ray. He insisted on it. He also did and you always did what Ray wanted you to do. He even insisted his own boys call him Ray, especially Dave and Dan. We always called him Ray. I hardly ever remember calling him Dad. You know, he was Ray. He always will be Ray. No one could ever accuse Ray of partiality. It was his way of treating us as equals. Let me end with this, and finally, I want to close with, Dad, Ray, I want to thank you today, Ray. I want to thank you today, Dad, for making all of us champions, making your sons champions and your daughters champions, for instilling the love of baseball in all of us, more specifically for showing us what it takes to be a champion, for teaching us the right way to do things, for teaching us how to think, how to anticipate, how to keep our heads up when things didn't go the way you wanted, for teaching us not to drown in our self-help soup, for taking us across the river from ignorance to enlightenment. And we are forever grateful, Ray, for your example, for what you've done for Cleveland Baseball, the Cleveland Baseball Federation, and the Schmatzer family, and all those that you touched and didn't touch. Ray, I want you to know this one more time today, Dad, that we love you. And thank you, Dad. Okay.
Well, for the ones that don't know, my name's Tim Wells. I'm probably one of the few that was around when John Nagy was commissioner, and I'm still involved with the Recreation Department till today. First of all, I'd like to, before I begin, thank TV 20 that's here today videotaping this program, and we'll get the information out to everybody how you can get it. You don't have to be in Cleveland to get it. There's a lot of other ways to get it, and I want to thank them for coming. You know, Ray Schmatzer. You know, every time a person gets to be put in a museum, sometimes you got guys like Danny Coughlin last year that talked about Commissioner Nagy, and he was right on. He had all the stories. And just like everybody in this room, you think about Ray, you think about, well, I remember when Ray did this. And again, those memories we hold on to. Well, let me give you a checklist. Just see if you can answer these and you think about it. Did you really know Ray? What was his wife's name? Laverne. How many sons did he have? 4. Names: Dave, Dan, Raymond, and Tim. And Raymond was always called Buddy. How many daughters? 2. And they came first in his life, Mary and Ann. What street did they live on? What's 49th off of Denison? And as Dave mentioned, it was a tough neighborhood. How did he work to raise a family with everything he did? What did he do? He worked for the railroad. And besides that, he did all the other things that you've heard here today. What did people call him? When you hear about Ray, what did they call him? Coach? Dave said it's not Dad, but I've heard people say that's our father. He was a league director in Class F where he would have kids playing on soccer fields to fill the park with more games. As I always remembered him as Mr. Sponsor. He was a husband, he was a Christian. As they mentioned, he was a U.S. Army veteran. But on top of that, he was a boxer for the Army when he was there. And many people today still talk about a fair person and a total gentleman. Also, what was the name? He's the only guy I know that coached in 2 different locations and they had the same school name. St. Edward High School in Lakewood and St. Edward University in Austin, Texas. And I remember going there with Tim and visiting him and learning. They asked this, think about it, true or false? Answer this to yourselves. Ray Schmatzer never used profanity. Well, what did he say? So I'm going to ask Tom Cummings, stand up, Tom, who lives right in that neighborhood, that can share a story on what did he actually say when he was getting to the point where he wanted to say something he didn't want to say.
Well, I've known Ray for a long time. Everybody's Ray never used profanity. It was, gosh darn it! If there was a close play or a player didn't hustle or a player made 6 errors, it was, gosh darn it! So, sorry, Bill. 1994, I called Ray on the phone, and I asked Ray, I said, Ray, I would be honored if you would do a church reading for my wedding. And I'm waiting for a reply, and there was a little pause. And Ray says to me, Tom, I don't think I can do it. I'm a little bit older, and I don't want to mess up in your wedding. So I gave it right back to him. I said, gosh, darn it, Ray, I can't believe you're stiffing. Conversation ended. 5 minutes later, phone rang, and it was Ray. He said, Tom, I'll do it. Ray did it perfectly with flying colors. And did a fantastic job. And I'd like to say, Ray, Laverne, and Tim, man, look down upon us grace and enjoy this day with us.
True or false? John, can you answer this one? Is this true or false? He had coached a St. Boniface basketball team that would practice at Clark Recreation. And then he also demanded that those players kept moving all the time. Can't stop. Got to keep moving. Constant movement, with the ball, without the ball. And then on top of that, the teenage, I call them the teenage troublemakers at the time, asked Mr. Schmatzer, can we come in and scrimmage your team and play against them? Did he do that? What do you think, John? Did he do that? Yes. But he had a catch to it. And that catch was the same guidelines he lives by. If anybody used profanity, you got to leave. Anybody disrespected, you got to leave. And that life lesson went on forever, where people would sit at my recreation center at that time, and I would hear him say, when's Mr. Schmatzer come? I know he'll let us play against him. He can teach us a few things. Those kind of things they don't take away from you. Just like the memories you have today, they don't take them away from us. We talk about it, we keep about it. And is this true or false? Would he walk to church every day from his house to St. Boniface 7 days a week? Yes. Never missed a day. Now, here's the other thing. This tells you about his sons. Now, I first want to say one thing about Kramer, Dave. And when they were talking about the 6 years, I remember your dad said, recover, recover, recover. Then he gets to the end, he goes, I don't know what else I can say.
That wasn't it, but I'll tell you.
But he told his sons, do not go into coaching. Of course, what did they do? Even Tim. And Tim Schmatzer. I have a special place for that man. He played for me as a kid. He came back to us in recreation and helped our kids teach and develop. And he's the only one of the Schmatzers, Danny, the only one that went back to St. Edward High School to coach basketball. Not Dan and Dave, they go to Padua, and everybody's screaming in the gym to Verba, put them in, put them in! Because they could flat out play and we knew it. But it was Ray that still kept instilling in everybody he ran. And I know that because when I was thin back then, I was a kid that was grasping for knowledge. And I would go sit in his house, and he would talk about baseball. He would talk about life. He taught me, and I wrote a letter, and I'm going to share it with you when I'm done here. But here's the other thing. Their house on 49th, Dave, big backyard? No. But what did they do? They played baseball, broke a window. Doggone it, here's Rick. Again, broke a window, did the damage. That poor guy down on Clark on Wyman Hardware, he sold more windows to the Schmatzer family than I ever knew. Well, what about disciplining his sons? How did he discipline? And I said that to Mr. Schmatzer. I said, how do you discipline these guys? He said, oh, it's easy. He says, I remember when they did something, he said, you guys are going to go downstairs, and you're going to bounce the ball. You're going to dribble it 200 times with your left hand, 200 times with your right hand. And he said, believe me, Tim, their wrists will be so sore, they won't do that again. And that's how he did it. There was different creative ways that he was teaching and developing and making them special. And The other thing is, he believed in his community. I mean, we hear about guys, Dan, every time they go into a museum about the stats and winning championships, and Ray had all that. Now, I want to share this with you. This was a letter I wrote, and Dave found it, sent it to me. It was on August 17th, 1974. Mr. Schmatzer, I am writing this letter to thank you for your help and guidance that you gave me this past summer. You showed me a great deal of knowledge about life and baseball. You have taught me more about baseball than I will ever know. You gave me answers when I asked. You showed me about nerve control. I am really grateful that you took time out to show me some things that I was blinded to. One of my many visits I have made to your house, I will never forget. Through your emotions and expressions, you showed me that you were hurt. You seemed to be depressed that day. We talked, and I hope you felt better. I am truly sorry. There are times when people get disappointments and surprises. Times for laughter and happiness really helps those situations. But by far, there are more times of happiness than there are of disappointments. You are a great man. You have a lot to be proud of. You're a true Christian. When you have God on your side, you can never lose. You will always win because you have the heart to do good. If there's anything you would want from me, I will treat you as special needs of a father that you have been to me. I know this, and please, to a fantastic man with loads of appreciation. So, let me just say this. I wondered what he would tell us today. And I think he would say to all of us, you gave me a life filled with happiness, loved by my family, blessed with many friends. All of you can reward me now by living every day to the fullest. I would not be surprised if Ray Schmatzer right now has got batting practice in heaven with Tim working on his swing. But at this time, I'm going to ask that Ray's children come up here as we unveil the plaque that will be placed in the museum here. And we want to unveil that right now. So if they would come up, the children, Dan, Dave, Mary, Tim, Schmatzer Jr., and Renee. Are you good over there, TV20? I think it should be, this is Tim Schmatzer's wife, Renee, and his son, Tim Schmatzer. And then you have Dan,
My son Jeremy.
Jeremy,
One of the child.
Dave, and
Come on, Ann.
Dave, there. Three, one, come up.
Get my wife up.
And hustle up here.
And you have more respect. You have more seniority. Okay.
My wife Sheila.
Sheila.
As you can see where you get the good looks.
Dan, can you help us with the?
No, that's gonna be too hard. Get somebody else.
No, please.